Severely weakened and crushed by two overwhelming forces, what remained of the Wehrmacht by December of 1944 continued to defend the crumbling empire. The Allies had calmly settled near the German border after breaking from Normandy, and they knew Germany had lost the war. Many US soldiers on the front lines were replaced with new recruits, who saw the task almost like a vacation. Bernard Montgomery, commander of the 12th Army, went as far as to say, quote, "The inadequacies of German manpower, equipment, and resources precluded any offensive action on their part." However, on the night of December 15th, the green US GIs began to hear unsettling sounds, mechanical growling, and isolated gunfire in the distance, but with no experience to assess the situation, they did nothing. A few hours later, their world came crashing down. Like thunder, a vast German force descended upon the US forces, their numbers and strength so overpowering that they seemed to have appeared out of thin air. In a final attempt to turn the tide of the war, the Germans had managed to unleash a last ferocious offensive on the unsuspecting Allies, seeking to break them and force a peace negotiation. The Battle of the Bulge had just started. The last offensive. After the German defeat at Stalingrad, the advance of the Red Army had become unstoppable. The Soviets' numbers and resources appeared unending, and their thirst for revenge was relentless. As 1944 drew to a close, Hitler was forced to admit that Berlin would soon fall to the Soviets, unless they could somehow divert all of the forces on the Western Front to defend the East. But their situation in the West was almost as abysmal as in the East, with the Western Allies at the fringes of the German border after a highly proficient breakout from Normandy. Nevertheless, the Western forces were much more vulnerable than the Red Army in Hitler's mind. The German dictator considered the alliance between Britain and the US fragile, and believed one decisive blow could unravel the thread that united them and convince America to sign a peace deal. After that, Germany would be able to focus on the Soviets. Even so, Germany suffered a devastating lack of strategic resources, insufficient manpower, and broken equipment. Mounting such a sudden offensive attack would require mustering all the remaining strength the German troops had to offer. As for a plan of attack, the strategy was clear. Hitler would employ the same tactics he used 4 years before, and launch a lighting attack through the Ardennes with his most capable formation, the 6th Panzer Army. The troops would break through the US lines in the Ardennes, cross the River Meuse, and then seize the city of Antwerp to divide the Allied front, causing a massive debacle as the one that led the Allies to the evacuation in Dunkirk. The scheme was a monumental gambit, as the Germans could deliver the Allies a surprising and humiliating blow that could lead them to reconsider their war efforts, or it could waste the little resources the Wehrmacht had left, leaving them exposed to an Allied incursion into Germany. Not a man willing to play defensive games, Hitler risked it all and unleashed the Ardennes offensive. Silent mobilization. The element of surprise was critical for the success of the Ardennes offensive. The Allies needed to believe the Germans were incapable of launching an attack. To achieve this, the German military assembled thousands of men who silently dashed across the forests covered by night. During the day, they would hide in local villages and towns, storing their vehicles in barns or covering them in foliage. As such, Allied warplanes scoured the countryside and saw no indication of a force-gathering effort. As the German soldiers assembled, they had no idea what was in store. The operation was kept top secret, even from regimental commanders, until mere hours before the battle. Only the highest echelons of the German command knew about the offensive, and many high-ranking officers advised Hitler that what was left of the troops and resources had to be used for the defense of Germany. Alas, Hitler would not listen, and he overruled his advisors. As the main attack force stealthily assembled, Otto Skorzeny, the German SS commando who had rescued Benito Mussolini a year before, led a group behind enemy lines, dressed as US and British soldiers in Operation Greif. The English-speaking German agents sabotaged Allied supply lines and communications facilities, changed signposts, misdirected traffic, and caused as much disruption to the Allied forces in the crucial hours before the attack as possible. The group even managed to misdirect an entire regiment, sending it away. Meanwhile, another special operations group executed Operation Stusa, in which a nighttime paratroop dropped behind the Allied lines to capture a crucial road junction near Normandy. The silent German deployment was a substantial success in keeping the Allies unwary of the incoming attacks, but the rate of mobilization under already depleted conditions put the Wehrmacht in a precarious situation, spreading their supply lines to the very brink of collapse. As German forces inside and outside Allied lines prepared for the assault, the American and British troops had no idea they would endure the last full-fledged German effort to win the war. On the morning of December 16, 1944, Nazi Germany unleashed a final devastating blitzkrieg over Europe. Containing the onslaught. In the early hours of December 16th, the 6th Panzer Army, commanded by Sepp Dietrich, charged against U.S. positions in a ferocious and abrupt attack that caught many U.S. soldiers still inside their tents, fighting to reach their rifles and equipment as the German tanks overwhelmed their positions. Ignoring Hitler's orders to lead the attack with a massive artillery barrage, Hasso von Manteuffel and the 5th Panzer Army rushed to silently cross the Sauer River to surprise the sleeping Americans. The sudden and brutal attack sent many U.S. recruits into a panicked frenzy. Many fled in terror, while others wet themselves or threw up on the spot. In the blink of an eye, the front lines along the Ardennes had become a hellish nightmare for the unprepared Allies. The Germans achieved immediate victories, crushing one Allied position after another, piercing proficiently into French and Belgian territory, and giving birth to the German bulge in the front lines. Despite the terror and territorial losses they caused, the Germans were met with fierce resistance in some places, especially where more experienced U.S. troops were posted. 20-year-old Lieutenant Lyle Boak Jr. led a heroic defense in Lanzarote with only 18 men and 4 forward artillery observers. He held an entire battalion of over 500 Germans for 10 hours, inflicting 92 casualties while only losing 1 man. The epic stand came at a high cost to the German 6th Panzer Army, breaking their plans and allowing other U.S. forces to dig in by the time the panzers advanced. It would take a special group of 50 German paratroopers to finally overwhelm the fearless platoon. Most men were taken as prisoners of war, and only a few would see the war's end. Lieutenant Boak would blame himself for the capture of his men, and it would be months before he learned of what their brave efforts had cost the Germans. 37 years later, the entire platoon was awarded decorations for their heroic deeds. The Bulge. Despite American resistance and a series of significant delays, errors, and miscalculations, the Germans were able to pierce the Allied front lines and seize the towns of Hunsfeld and Bullingen, along with a major fuel depot. In addition, the horrid weather pushed the German vehicles to the limit and prevented the assault from having any significant air support. As such, a significant part of the 326th Volksgrenadier Division was decimated by Allied forces when they became exposed during the night by their own floodlights illuminating the path. For the Germans, the price was fair. They had broken through the Allied lines and created an enormous bulge that menaced with splitting the Allied forces and shattering their war efforts in the west. The following day, as the Allies scrambled to assemble a response, General Dwight Eisenhower summoned all the available reserves to the front lines, deploying the 101st and 82nd Airborne Divisions to rush into the city of Bastogne before the German panzers reached the site. Steadily, the bulge continued to expand. Soon, the 1st SS Panzer Division took Bullingen and several villages in their scorching path from Lanzarote. They captured Allied troops in every site and executed them in cold blood under orders of Joachim Peiper. Such war crimes provoked terror among the U.S. troops in the region. Meanwhile, the 2nd Infantry Division, the Indian Head, bravely defended Belgium against the wrath of the advancing Wehrmacht. They were nearly eradicated near Eisenborn Ridge, but were saved by the last stand of one of their battalions, which allowed the rest of the division to withdraw. Finally, the 1st Army headquarters was abandoned with haste, resulting in chaos and confusion as General Bradley continued to defend the region, even when the commanders had left. Siege of Bastogne. Morale among the Germans was soaring. The letters that the soldiers wrote home revealed they believed victory was possible and perceived their advance as unstoppable. But as the Germans reached Bastogne, Eisenhower regrouped his forces and commanded that Germany would not cross the Meuse River under any circumstances. The Allied reinforcement in the north coincided with the Germans reaching the limit of their weakened supply lines. Hitler's plan to take Antwerp and split the Allies in two seemed more unlikely by the minute. The Germans then surrounded Bastogne on December 21st. For now, they would have to toe the line by taking the city. A massive German force, led by General Heinrich Freiherr von Lüttwitz, laid siege to Bastogne, while the American 101st Airborne Division garrisoned the city, preparing to defend it to the last man. Stretched beyond their supplies and manpower, Lüttwitz did not have the resources to destroy the 101st, but the Americans didn't know that. In a daring ultimatum, the German commander sent a letter to General Anthony McAuliffe, the Bastogne garrison commander, demanding the city's immediate surrender or annihilation. McAuliffe soon responded, quote, "To the German commander, nuts," the American commander. The siege continued for several days, as General Patton's 4th Armored Division struggled to reach and relieve the city due to the significant destruction in the region. The Germans, unable to take Bastogne, continued their now futile advance, taking the town of Celle to the west. But their efforts were doomed. They were running on fumes and lacked the supplies to retreat from the position. Meanwhile, the sun finally appeared, and the US unleashed its air supremacy over the region, punishing the depleted German troops as they clung to their fallen siege. On December 26th, Patton's tanks punched through the German blockade, led by a spectacular rain of artillery salvo and napalm. The Ardennes offensive was broken and shackled in place. Even so, Hitler refused to withdraw. End of the line. In utter defeat, Hitler embraced madness and refused to retreat. He formed Army Group Lüttwitz out of the shattered remains of his offensive forces and threw them against the defenders of Bastogne in one wave after another. In early 1945, Allied warplanes ravaged through Army Group Lüttwitz, who were forbidden to retreat by Hitler himself. By January 11th, the starving, uncommunicated troops outside Bastogne began to break off. As January ended, the German bulge vanished, and the front lines returned to their positions before the offensive. The Wehrmacht would never again be able to assemble another large-scale attack. For the remainder of the conflict, they were destined to fight a hopeless war. Thank you for watching Dark Docs. Don't hesitate to click on your screen to explore another of our Dark Documentaries channels, where the most exciting war tales await you. We publish regularly, so hit the bell icon to be notified of our newest content. And stay tuned.